evening. Welcome to the Big Story. I'm Regina Lay.
I'm
And I'm Shawn Yao.
Tonight's Big Stories. It was a show of force on day one of the campaigning for the coalition of President Bongbong Marcos in his turf of Lawag, Ilocos Norte, that even his sister, who calls herself an independent, showed up for.
And the candidates of both the traditional and emerging opposition also got busy today as former Senators Bam Aquino and Kiko-Bam launched their Senate comeback bids in Quezon City, as did re-electionist Bato de la Rosa.
And the Maharlika Investment Corporation makes its second investment, putting down $100 million in a fund to be co-managed with a conglomerate from Thailand. We will be sitting down with President and CEO Rafael Consing Jr. about this later on in the show.
Of course, it's day one of the three-month campaign period. The administration senatorial candidates did not waste time and immediately hit the campaign trail.
Now, no less than President Bongbong Marcos kicked off their proclamation rally tonight. The Alianza para sa Bagong Pilipinas team came in full force in the Marcos Bailiwick of Lawag in Ilocos Norte.
To give us more updates, we have mobile journalist Marimon Reyes joining us live from Lawag. Marimon, I know you've been there all day, and we have gotten some updates from you throughout. Aside from Senator Amy Marcos turning up late in the day, what were the other highlights of Team BBM's proclamation rally?
One of the main highlights was that the senatorial slate, Alianza para sa Bagong Pilipinas, was completed. Around noon kasi kanina nung press con, 8 out of 12 lang ang nag-show up and shinare nila kung ano nga ba yung mga panukala na gusto nilang i-push through if ever na sila ay manunungkulan. So yun sa mga narinig natin, 14-month pay from dating former Senate President Tito Soto, waiving of bank secrecy for government officials from Ping Lacson, amendments sa local government code para kay dating DILG Secretary Benhur Abalos, even yung pag-refile ng bill na nagtatanggal ng value-added tax sa kuryente mula kay Francis Tolentino. Pareho namang naisuportahan ni former Senator Manny Pacquiao and Representative Erwin Tulfo ang small and medium enterprises. And para naman kay former Makati Mayor Abby Binay, gusto niyang tutukan naman yung pagtanggal ng buwis mula sa 13th month pay at overtime pay. And last but definitely, they say not the least, Camille Villar, ang tinitingnan niya naman ay yung pagsuporta raw sa mga industriya na nakapagpo-produce ng trabaho to address unemployment. Kanina sa press con, wala sina re-electionist hopefuls Bong Revilla, Pia Cayetano, ang aktor na si Dito Lapid, and even ang presidential sister na si Senator Amy Marcos. Pero kanina nga nung naglunsad na yung main event of the proclamation rally, nakumpleto sila. Nagbudos itong si former Senator Bong Revilla, nagpaunlak at nagsalita din itong sila Senator Amy Marcos, and nakumpleto itong pinaka-slate nila. Bukod dito, pinaunlakan din ng ilang mga celebrity performers ang proclamation rally na ito, including si Teddy, RC Munoz, and marami pang iba. Even si Bugoy Drilon nag-perform din kasama nila. Kaya isa ito sa pinaka naging highlight ng araw ng mga naging supporters sa pumunta doon. Nasabi kanina ng senatorial slate, kaya raw nila napag-usapan o napag-agrihan na simulan sa Ilocos yung kanilang pangangampanya ay dahil naniniwala rin daw sila at nagiging aligned daw sila sa vision ni Pangulong Bongbong Marcos. At the same time, yung roots nito na dito sa Ilocos Norte. Pero kung titingnan din kasi natin, medyo mabigat din ang bearing nito sa pinaka-period ng pangangampanya up to the main voting day. Sa ngayon kasi, 434,114 ang nainatalang rehistrado sa Ilocos Norte. And we could remember, malaki ang naging vote turnout ni Pangulong Bongbong Marcos sa Ilocos noong siya ay tumakbo bilang Pangulo. Isa ritong strategic launch site para sa coalition. And same goes din sa mga susunod na araw kasi pupunta sila sa Iloilo, Davao del Norte, and then Pasay. And lahat ito, isa ito sa mga ways nila para mas maabot pangaraw ang maraming tao. Balik sa inyo.
Okay, syempre alam naman natin itong alyansa, no? It's made up of different personalities all coming together for this midterm election, Marimon. Ano yung mga sinasabi nila, sa lahat ng nasabi nila ngayong araw na ito, ano yung common denominator? Meron ba silang common campaign cry or campaign rally?
Yes, pinakamalinaw sa lahat ng sinasabi nila, lahat ng ginagawa nila, even if may history sila of politics way back, merong mga naging magkalaban during the presidential elections around 2 years ago. Ngayon, sila daw ay nagkaisa para lang daw sa isang rason at para daw mabuo at ma-push through talaga ang bagong Pilipinas. Kaya sa lahat daw ng mga panukala nila, isusuportahan nila ang Administrasyong Marcos at the same time yung mga panukala din ng gusto nilang iambag sa pamamagitan ng mga batas o iba pang mga inisyatibo, yun daw ang tututukan nila sa mga susunod na buwan kung sakaling mabibigyan sila ng pagkakataon na manerbisyo bilang mga senador.
So in a way, the battle cry is still unity. Hindi ba?
Yes,
It's still
pretty much.
unity.
Yun lang din yun.
Yeah. And also, I saw former LG Sec Benhur Abalos, or was it? Oh no, sorry, Congressman Erwin Tulfo saying that they don't want to campaign, do negative campaigns, right? Hindi sila, they're gonna try not to, what do you call this? To hit the other candidates. Kasi everyone's tired of it. Pagod na daw tao, which is true.
Totoo naman, may point siya na wala nang paninira itong kampanya. So, kumpleto ba? Nakumpleto ba yung lahat? Sabi mo, no, in the end, na nakumpleto sila lahat. So, just double-checking that everyone did finally make it.
Yes, from 8 out of 12, naging 12 out of 12 sila. Nakumpleto talaga nitong main event na ng proclamation rally nila.
Pero Marimon, will all 12 senatorial candidates continue campaigning together? Ano ba yung schedule nila sa mga susunod na araw, mga linggo? Because we know Ilocos, ang norte, talagang bailiwick nga ng mga Marcos. What's the schedule like for the administration slate and the weeks to come?
On February 13, Alianza will be going to Iloilo, and then February 15, Carmen, Davao del Norte, and then February 18, Pasay City. So far, same pa naman ang mga plans nila. Sama-sama sila ng mga ngampanya. Bukod na lang daw kung sakaling magkaroon ng emergencies or other reasons na hindi makakapunta yung ilan sa mga senatorial slate na ito. Pero isa sa babantayan din natin is potentially kung si Presidential Sister, Senator Amy Marcos, if she will be joining yung iba pang mga campaign rallies na gagawin ng Alyansa, o baka ngayon lang dito sa kanilang proclamation rally. Kasi nga, medyo reserved pa rin itong si Senator Amy Marcos pagdating sa alyansa in general. Pero since nagpakita siya kanina, she's open pa rin in supporting. And since wala pa rin naman daw iwanan na nagaganap sa kanila.
Okay, maraming salamat sa inyong update. That was Marymon Reyes reporting to us live from Lawag in Ilocos Norte. Maraming salamat. Ingat, Marymon.
Well, the Dutertes haven't hit the campaign trail just yet, but some of their allies already did. Re-electionist Senator Ronald Bato de la Rosa started the first day of campaign by hearing mass in Quezon City. He recently came under fire for insulting the facial appearance of Congressman Percy Sendanya, who is a stroke survivor. In the coming days, de la Rosa says his campaign style will be patterned after Oplan Tokhang.
Tokhang talaga. Tokhang yun. Knock and plead. Katukin mo yung pintuan ng bahay. Pag open, kung smiling, you plead. Pwede ba nyo kung ibuto? O, ganoon. Pero kung pag open ng bahay, nakasibangot, ay sorry po, alis ako.
Senator Bongo, on the other hand, went around shaking hands with motorists and commuters and eating kwek-kwek by the roadside in front of a malasakit center in Davao City. He also attended the General Assembly of the League of Municipalities, where he talked about his platform on health.
Over on the other side of the fence, allies of former Vice President Leni Robredo held what they called their People's Campaign Kickoff Rally in the vote-rich province of Cavite. Prior to that, their whole day had been jam-packed with activities. Akbayan Party List nominees Attorney Chel Diokno and Congressman Percy Sendanya started off the day by spearheading a Zumba session at the UP Sunken Garden. Next, they attended Mass together with fellow senatorial aspirants Kiko-Bam, Bam Aquino, Erin Tanyada, and Teddy Bagilat, as well as Robredo herself. Robredo had promised that she would help them before she focuses on her mayoral run in Naga. The local campaigning period only begins on March 28. Pangilinan and Aquino are campaigning on the same advocacies that they have been pushing for years: agriculture and education. However, they have lagged in most pre-election surveys.
Kumbaga sa basketball, di ba? Second quarter na tayo. Medyo tinambakan tayo ng first quarter. So babawi tayo ng second quarter hanggang sa dulo, may papanalo na natin. No? So this is a continuation of our patuloy ng ating simulain ng gobyernong tapat.
Kami naman klaro na independent ang aming pagtakbo. May dalawang malaking grupo na nag-uumpugan ngayon at kami naman po ni Senator Kiko, klaro ng pinapanigan namin yung taong bayan. Yung focus namin, in his case, yung pagkain, yung murang presyo, pagbaba ng presyo ng pagkain at sa akin naman, yung mga reforma sa edukasyon.
Pangilinan and Aquino then went house to house in Quezon City. They started in Barangay Cruz Naligas, where they were accompanied by actress Marjorie Barreto.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, but coming up, we sit down with Maharlika Investment Corporation President and CEO Rafael Consing Jr. to talk about the fund's latest investment, a $1 billion partnership with a Thai conglomerate. The details of that after the break. Keep it here on One News.
Welcome back. You're watching The Big Story here on One News.
Well, just 2 weeks after announcing its investment in the National Grid Corporation, the Maharlika Investment Corporation has entered into another landmark agreement. MIC is investing an initial $100 million or 5.8 billion pesos in a private equity fund that it will create together with a Thai conglomerate, Shadowen Pokpan Group. The goal is to raise up to $1 billion over time, with the money going towards investments in agriculture and food production, digital innovation, and sustainable energy in the Philippines. Established in 1921, CP Group is one of Asia's largest conglomerates. It has operations in agriculture, food production, as well as retail in over 30 countries. Now, in August last year, CP Group committed to investing some $1.5 billion in the Philippines, starting with a 10,000-hectare modernized mega farm. The Maharlika Investment Corp, which controls the country's sovereign wealth fund, said it will set up a steering committee for the new equity fund to drive project selection, with the first capital close expected in the next 9 to 12 months.
All right, so here to talk about this latest investment and where the Maharlika Fund is headed, we are honored to have with us in the studio tonight Maharlika Investment Corporation President and CEO Rafael Joel Consing Jr. Welcome, sir. Good
Thank
evening.
you for inviting me.
Good to have you here in the studio finally.
Yes.
And on this day, specifically.
On
too.
the day one of campaigning, you mean? I don't know, he's not campaigning for anything, but it's good to have you here.
Thank you.
On a big day, you just announced your second investment, private equity fund in partnership with Charan Pokpan Group from Thailand. We're putting in $100 million upfront first. Tell us what the story is behind this. How did this idea come about? Who approached whom?
Well, we're really executing in our the plans that we've set out at the onset of the fund. We basically said it at the onset we'll be investing in energy security, and that's what NGCP was all about. And after which I said we were going to be investing in agriculture, for food security, broadband initiatives as well, and quite a number of sectors as well. So hence we're just really executing in those projects.
But did we approach CP Group or they came to us?
They came to us. Yeah, just like what you said earlier, they've been planning to invest in the Philippines already, so we felt it was a good platform to work together. We were looking for a proper entry into the agricultural market, and we felt that it was quite, I would say, quite useful to be teaming up with someone as good as CP Group.
I have to ask though, Joel,
Sure.
I would imagine at first, in the beginning, that you would invest into direct businesses, right? But you actually invested with CP Foods into a private equity agricultural fund, focusing on that. And then you further, together, predetermined the areas of cooperation, right? So there's fintech, sustainable energy, food production, the works. Why that instead of just, investing directly into companies? Tell us the rationale behind it.
Well, if you look at the technical expertise of CP Group, it really made sense for us to be teaming up with them. We were thinking of ways by which to enter the agricultural market. We've thought about we had access to a few ideas, and we felt that the best way to really do this is by teaming up with someone who's got the technical expertise and the size and the network and the ability to contribute capital to such an undertaking, and felt that CP Group was the right company to be teaming up with.
And just to clarify, those investments that you will be making with CP Group, it will all be domestic, meaning here in the Philippines?
All domestic. All domestic. So, like what I said at the onset also, we were going to be steering this National Development Fund during its nascent stage.
The idea is to grow the fund to up to $1 billion. The Philippines is Maharlika is only putting in $100 million. The
That's
rest
correct.
to be filled in by CP Group and other institutional investors.
That's right.
Does that mean they get more board seats or voting power?
No, we're not there yet.
Okay.
We basically have to. We just announced we just put the team together, and we're aligning on those objectives and the framework as well. So we've got those teams together, and they're putting those plans together now.
Okay, but at least the upside is that all of that money should go back into the Philippines.
Absolutely.
Into projects within the Philippines.
Yes, indeed.
Well, as Regina mentioned earlier, the goal is to raise up to $1 billion, with a lot of the investment geared towards agriculture, food production, digital transformation. Can you explain how this partnership will improve the Philippines' own digital transformation, and what role will e-commerce play into this?
Sure. No, so let's talk about big picture first. If you look at the drivers of today's economy, of the country's economy, it's really been household consumption, and you also have a bit of investments, but we really lack investments. That's the reality. You've got government spending really propping up the economy as well as consumption, but our exports, pardon me, we still have a trade deficit. So therefore, the primary driver beyond that would have to be investment, and that's what basically what we're trying to do. Now, as to its direct effect, number one, what we aim to do is to invest in modernization of agricultural production, modes of agricultural production, similarly expanding and accelerating digital transformation for these companies that we will be acquiring, and then third would be doing sustainable energy.
What sort of companies are you looking out for? What are the parameters, or is that also? I'm ahead of the...
Yeah. yes, indeed.
And I mean, anyone who's listening who could be a candidate would be interested to know, all right, I want to be part of I want to apply for a chunk of that fund, right? So I was wondering, okay,
is that possible, or do you accept like proposals, pitches?
So we'll be, it's a good question. So we'll be identifying our targets. We do have already quite a number of targets in mind, and we have to basically discuss that and percolate that into a strategy. And hopefully, really within the next 6 to 9 months, we'll be able to announce the details of our plans.
Okay, I'll step it back a bit. I'm just curious again with this new partnership, because I know CP Foods has been here. They have some facilities, I believe, down south in Mindanao. What made them do they think, in their opinion, was approaching MIC easier? Kumbaga, because maybe perhaps they wouldn't have to experience so much red tape, et cetera, like the usual problems of investors when they try to look at the Philippines as a destination.
And also there's the foreign ownership limits, right? 60-40.
Wait, like what you said, they do have an exposure in the Philippines.
Right.
In fact, I think that they're quite significant, in fact, in the Philippines.
Yes.
So hence, they really don't need someone like us. That's the reality. But that said, we do bring something to the table. We do bring our own relationships, our own ability to bring in capital from other investors. And it makes sense for us to build that platform together in order for us to be able to pursue these. Now, you're absolutely right. Certain of these things, they may not be able to do it alone. So hence, they would require the partnership with the Filipino. And that's what MIC is all about. So we were created as, in fact, the collaborative vehicle of the government to be able to attract FDI. And it's exactly what we're doing now.
Is anyone else in line, apart from CP? Of course, first it was NGCP, and then this came very soon after. And everything was pretty quiet for almost 2 years, and then bam, bam. So I'm sure you have a pipeline.
Yes,
and I'm
we
sure, contrary to what everyone thinks, you have been meeting and working behind the scenes. So how deep is this pipeline, and what can we look forward to?
I think we've got one more. We've got one more that we're going to be announcing soon. Quite a significant
Feel free to
transaction
announce
as
it
well.
right now.
No, because it involves a listed company, not the Philippine listed company, but a foreign listed company.
Will it still be infra-focused?
It will be an infrastructure play, yes.
Transportation? I mean, a lot of people are hoping it would be transportation.
But not the Philippines.
No, it's one of our priorities. Transportation is certainly one of our priorities, but that's not what we're announcing next.
Okay.
But not in the
clue, that's a clue.
Philippines. Not a Philippine listed company.
Not a Filipino.
Not a Philippine listed company.
Why is that? I know Pao's dying to ask the question about the valuation. I mean, equity, the stock market is down right now. Valuations are down. It's a good
Yes.
time to pick up
Yes.
bargains.
Yes. No, well, okay, so if you look at the way we've written our framework, we're really acting like a private equity. And we do get ourselves exposed to the public markets, provided it's part of an overall M&A transaction. So hence, you may have heard about us having bought, for example, into SGP shares, but that's really because it's part of a bigger M&A deal. So hence, investing in the public markets is not an immediate or an obvious investment for us, because we've got a twin mandate, that being able to have social impact and at the same time profits. You don't really generate social impact when you invest in the stock market.
Having said that, you're not closing the door on listed companies.
If
investing in
it's
listed
if it's
companies.
part of an M&A deal, an overall M&A deal, we will be open to the market.
You talked about, since you brought up the fact that we've lagged in investment, I'm sorry, I have to ask you this.
Yes.
Do you foresee any impact an impeachment trial may have on the perception of the Philippines as an investment destination? I mean, already we're hard pressed to sell the country as an attractive destination vis-a-vis other Southeast Asian nations. So again, and now the headlines, not just in the country but overseas, are all about the impeachment.
Yes, no. So I think that in any jurisdiction, any such political event would cause some, I would say, I don't want to be too aggressive with the words I use, but it does create some concern. Okay? But that said, the way we basically look at our investments, it's regardless of the direction of the economy. So we look at what the structural investments that are needed in the economy, and it's exactly why we're focused on energy. So regardless of where the economy is going, we need energy.
Well, speaking of energy, this brings to mind NGCP. I remember at the beginning of the deal, I was wondering why they had to give up some of their shares. I understand that a franchise is a privilege, et cetera, right? But of course, thinking from the shoes of an investor, it's like, oh, this country, they gave away a franchise, and then they took it back, they chopped it up, and gave somebody else a chunk of the pie, right? Does this also not raise certain issues, certain concerns with investors? Or does Maharlika, this interesting concept you introduced tonight to me at least, Maharlika sort of as a safety blanket or security blanket for foreign investors? How does this all come into play?
Okay, so just let's be specific now. In the case of NGCP, basically the way we look at it is energy security. If the DOE undertook a study before, right, and it basically the thesis is power precedes progress. And whenever we enter into a sector, the question that we ask ourselves is which part of the sector requires the most significant investment, and which would be the most impactful. And if you look at the energy security, there is, in fact, a significant amount of capital running after power generation projects. You've got so many conglomerates and families, in fact, investing in that. You've got distribution companies as well, wherein you've got access to large sums of capital. But transmission, both particularly in the SPUG areas or those which are classified under small power utility groups, require these types of investments. And that's what we decided to do, basically, is to pour capital into areas that would then catalyze and enable capital formation wholesale. So if you look at the way other sovereign wealth funds look at it, is they acquire a company and use that as a platform to grow. So in our case, we look at it in two ways. One is that way, but the other is to, in fact, trying to enable capital formation wholesale, wherein everyone invests in a platform or in a sector as a result of the investments that we're doing. That's why we felt that building energy infrastructure, telecoms infrastructure, would in fact enable that.
And that's what's going to lead, as far as you're concerned, that's what's going to lead to lower consumer prices in the long run.
Okay,
However-
so are we talking about electricity prices?
Correct.
Okay.
In the long run.
Yeah, no. So,
So it's all about bringing more supply onto the
correct. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So NGCP itself will not be able to drive down the price of power.
Yeah.
It's the mix of energy
Yes.
that basically is what we are
Yeah.
paying for.
Yes.
Right? And hopefully by being able to support the grid, with that we would then be able to get all of this generation capacity online and be able to reduce the
Cut
price
down
of
on the
reduce
overheads
the
and all of that.
overtime.
Unfortunately, NGCP has become, shall we say, a little bit politicized, right? You've paid attention to the House hearings, I'm sure. They are questioning they're alleging violation of the foreign ownership limits. Congressman Dan Fernandez, for one, has floated the idea of revoking the NGCP franchise. I don't remember how many more years it's got left. I believe
think
6 or 7 years, if I'm not
Still
mistaken.
about 10, but 9
Still
or 10
time.
years.
Oh, but 9 or 10. Okay. But in any case, Congress does have the power to revoke a franchise, and he's floated the idea. I know we're far off from that, but let's say, you know how it is in this country, political tides can turn very quickly. Worst case scenario, Congress takes back the franchise. What happens to your investment?
Well, basically, they just can't take it out without compensation. There is, in fact, a formula wherein, at the end of the concession agreement, in, let's say, 2034, if they decide to, in fact, remove it from the current owners, government will have to pay, in fact, SGP for that amount, or pardon me, the owners of NGCP, that repayment amount that's due them. And it's quite a large sum.
So it's going to cost Congress.
It's
to
well, no,
revoke
it's
that.
going to
cost
cost
the
the whole
It's going
country.
to cost the Philippines. I mean.
Correct. Yeah, it's going to cost the whole country. To my mind as well, in my opinion, I think this should remain in private sector hands. You know, during the committee hearings, there was so much information, for example, about the money that they've generated, the tariffs that they've charged. But no one talked about their capex. No one talked about the fact that they have, in fact, spent close to about 365 billion of capex.
In the Philippines.
In the Philippines, from the time they had acquired, they've been taken over, from the time it's been privatized. No one's talking about that, right? Everybody was just talking. Obviously, you have to generate a return out of such investment. Right? So hence, I think...
So you think you guys could actually help the investors into the national grid do that? Actually, it would also be good for their investment.
I think it is, in fact, a win-win scenario for the Philippines and the investor, particularly for the Filipinos, because today, since the time the asset was privatized, we completely had lost direct control over the asset. Today, when we finally close this deal, we'll have the ability to, in fact, sit in the board, so we will therefore gain visibility. We don't see anything that's alarming at this point in time, but it's different when you're actually sitting in the board and being able to participate in a debate and just ensure that when they roll out or when they talk about their capex rollout, it is in fact consistent with national interest, which I think it is. There's no indication that it's not.
Right. When he was asked about the NGCP investment, sorry,
Yes.
the synergy investment.
Yes.
Senate President Cheese Escudero said the fund has to be able to explain whether or not it would have made more than if that money had been placed in government securities. Whether it would have earned more. At the moment, government securities are yielding about, let's say, 6% annual,
Yes,
right? So the
yes,
question in his mind was, okay, by buying out Synergy's stake, will you be earning more? For
Than
the
6%.
government, right?
no,
So is
sure.
that something we can explain
No,
away?
it's a fair question. I mean, it's a fair point. So the dividends are 6.5%, and since the recipient is a corporate, which is MIC, that's tax exempt. So therefore, if you were to compare that to government security, you would not need to gross it up by 20%. Okay? So that 6.5%, in fact, is about 7.5 to about 8% once you remove the impact of withholding tax. But more important is, what is the objective? If our role is just to acquire government securities, for example, then we shouldn't have set up a fund. right? Our role is to, in fact, invest in real businesses in order for us to be able to enable and catalyze capital formation. And it's exactly what we're doing.
I just had a thought, Joel. A lot of our industries were deregulated. You know, during the tumultuous times when I was growing up in the late 80s to the early 90s. So I remember as a child, like a lot of things were being given. And it would seem now that, are we looking at reprivatization via the Maharlika Investment Corporation? Is that one thing, you know, certain industries, like you said, could benefit from being publicly owned?
Not at all. Absolutely not. You know, when we're speaking of NGCP, there was never an intention to take over. Like what I said, this should remain in private sector hands, but with the participation of government, both as a regulator and as a shareholder. And I think that that's enough.
So you think that this is actually, we've achieved like kind of a good balance
In my
with this
opinion,
investment?
Yes.
Well, Rafa, I wanted to know also, are there any restrictions or limits set on the MIF investments? And are you looking at any threshold yearly return for the MIF?
Sure. So we've set up our targeted returns already. We're aiming, obviously, to generate a significant spread above the existing benchmarks that are out there. And those benchmarks are the 10-year or the 20-year ROP bonds. But those are quite confidential. We don't want to telegraph those.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that's fair.
Those targets.
Just between the four of us. Don't worry about everyone else.
We don't want to telegraph those numbers because otherwise, when you're negotiating with us,
Right.
you'll be able to quote it.
That's true.
But the other question was the limits on
limits
the
and
investment.
restrictions,
Yes,
What sort of
yes. In
limits?
fact, yes, we do. So we've set up our single investment limit. We've also set up our own sectoral limits. We've basically set those up at 20% of our seed capital. And there's an extra 10% of tactical capital that we can allocate. So insofar as NGCP is concerned, that falls basically within the limits that we've set for it. That falls within the sectoral limits that we've set for ourselves. In addition to which, we also have our negative list or industries that we won't be investing in. Tobacco is, for example, one of them, or weapons is another.
So basically vices or perceived vices.
Yes, yes.
One of the biggest criticisms, or if not the biggest criticism when this was being set up, was because the Maharlika bill was done in a rush, that certain provisions were missed. For instance, how to fund this on a continuing basis, right? So at the moment, you have Land Bank and DBP needing to ask the Bangko Sentral for an extension on regulatory relief, meaning, okay, fine, their capital adequacy ratios are within limits at the moment, but they still need an extension in any case. Of course, Land Bank put in 50 billion, DBP put in 25. Do you foresee needing to ask for more from them?
So the capital that's been allocated to us is 125 billion. So we've received our 75 billion. There's another 33 billion that's going to be coming from the dividends due to government coming from the BSP.
Yep.
And you've got the 17 billion coming as balance coming from PAGCOR. So we haven't drawn on that 50 billion just yet. We will do that once we've been able to deploy a significant amount of what we have already. If you look at the type of sovereign wealth fund that we have, so we're currently cash-based, okay? If you look at other cash-based sovereign wealth funds across the globe, they are those whose seed is coming from windfall gains, coming from commodities. Let's say the Middle East coming from oil, African countries coming from gold, or Chile is coming from copper mines, et al. In our case, we obviously don't have that. So one of the things that we've spoken to the president about is the possibility of pivoting MIC not just as a cash-based sovereign wealth fund, but in fact as an asset-based sovereign wealth fund. Okay, so I've described to you one formula, but if you look at the other sovereign wealth funds across the globe, they were in fact seeded with GOCCs, or government-owned and controlled corporations. So if you look at the Philippines, you've got agencies that have a dual role. They, in fact, write policies or promulgate policies, but at the same time, they also have their commercial exposures, right? So theoretically, one would want to bifurcate those two.
Like PAGCOR.
Right.
maybe, and keep the policy making part of it with government, and the commercial side,
Take the commercial
someone
side
with
of it, so
with
do the
Maharlika.
business side.
Correct, and then from there we can then leverage that and create more capital out of it.
That's what you mean by asset-based.
That's right.
Again, when this was being envisioned, one of the examples that kept getting brought up was the Temasek Fund in Singapore. And I'm very familiar with Temasek because I lived in Singapore for 10 years. And yes, it's hugely successful, but also one of the other things that gets overlooked is actually it also makes bad decisions, bad investment. There's no such thing as a perfect investment, right? For example, it lost, what, $275 million in FTX when the crypto exchange crashed. So what guardrails do you have to hedge against those risks?
Great question. Number one is we've identified the sectors, we've identified the limits, and we stay within those limits. And we obviously undertake significant amount of analysis before we undertake an investment. And that's the reason why it took us this long to announce our initial investments, because of the due diligence that we've undertaken.
Okay, so in short, you're going to be taking on, as a group, as a corporation, as a fund, a more risk averse,
Yeah,
more
it's a lot more
moderate.
risk-averse, it sounds
Yeah,
profile.
moderate is the right
Moderate,
word. And the way to basically look at it, so we, in fact, if you go to our website, for those who are interested, they can go to our website and read our investment framework, and you will see there our risk statement. And we did say that we intend to take a moderate risk. But that said, you can in fact take, let's say, venture capital risk. But and the question is, how do you mix that and ensure that it is a moderate venture capital risk? Sounds counterintuitive, right? You do that
The
by
amount, or?
well, you co-invest with someone. B, you manage that by way of entering into long-term contracts, basically mitigating your risks. So there are many ways by which one can in fact de-risk these investments.
Fair point. We're being told to wrap up, but very quickly, let me just circle back to my question earlier. I don't think I got a straight answer, which is impeachment trial, political noise.
Yes.
Do you foresee that it might turn off some investors? Could there be any impact on the economy and the perception of the Philippines as a business destination?
I don't think so.
Okay. It's just noise.
I believe it's just nice.
Okay.
And they're the security blanket, after all, for investors, as a vehicle.
You're gonna
For, I mean,
Yeah,
it does
yeah.
kind of.
Yeah, we do know that
You
you
know,
put in
I
a lot of
understand.
effort to try to sell the Philippines overseas. So I think that's
Looking forward for the third
good
announcement.
To see that it's coming. It's all coming
coming
together.
soon.
It's coming soon. Okay.
Yeah,
We're waiting.
We can still announce it here. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Maharlika Investment Corporation
Thank you.
CEO and President Rafael Joel Consing Jr.
Thank you.
We're pausing for another breather, but right after that, we will be speaking to UP College of Law Assistant Professor Paulo Tamase, who wrote a primer on impeachment. That and more when the big story returns. Stay with us. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on The Big Story. It's another day, another senatorial survey, this time from Okta Research. So let's take a closer look at the numbers. The Tulfo brothers have a commanding lead on this one, with 70% and 60% of those surveyed saying they will vote for Erwin and Ben, respectively. Senator Bongo took third spot with a voting preference of 58%, followed by former Senate President Tito Soto. Senator Bong Revilla Jr. ranked between 4th to 11th spot, statistically tied with TV host Willie Revillame. Also within the same ranking are former Senator Ping Lacson and incumbent Pia Cayetano. Rounding out the top 12 were Manny Pacquiao, Amy Marcos, Lito Lapid, and Ben-Hur Abalos. Okta Research said they surveyed 1,200 voters across the nation from January 25 to 31 of this year, with a margin of error of plus or minus 3%. Meanwhile, in Ilocos Norte for the Alianza kickoff, former Senate President Soto said that there are two conflicting rules defining whether or not the impeachment trial of Vice President Sara Duterte can cross over from the 19th Congress to the 19th Congress, which ends its term on June 13, to the 20th Congress, which begins its term on July 21.
Makakatawid ba o hindi? Based on those two rules, both at the impeachment court, the rules of the Senate as an impeachment court and the rules of the Senate as a legislative body. Kaya nga very controversial yung issue sapagkat ano yun, judicial work, part of the work of the Senate as mandated by the Constitution.
One thing's clear, nearly a week since the Vice President was impeached by Congress, lots of big questions remain. And to help us with some answers, we have with us tonight Paulo Tamase, Assistant Professor at the UP College of Law in Diliman and Bonifacio Global City. And he wrote an impeachment primer on what we can all expect from the process. Welcome to the Big Story, Professor. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me.
I don't know if you heard if you understood the soundbite of Soto just before we came to you, but he said something along the lines of there are two conflicting rules around the question of whether or not the 19th Congress, which is the incumbent, can take up can convene as an impeachment court, and then for it to cross over to the 20th Congress. So the 19th Congress expires on June 3rd. And the 20th Congress only takes over July 21st. What does the Constitution say? What does your impeachment primer say about that?
So our primer, which I co-wrote with 4 of my former students, and I think the credit really goes to them as well. The primer acknowledges that this is a very gray area in the Constitution. I wish the text were clearer as to whether one Senate can continue over from a previous Senate that started an impeachment trial. But unfortunately, the text isn't just that clear. And so the primer really desists from taking a firm position for now and simply just presents the two theories. And basically, it depends on how you view the Senate. Is the Senate a continuing body that can exist despite the lapse of the term of the present Senate on June 30, or does it end its term on June 30, and therefore you have to transfer or you have to start anew as a Congress?
Since this is one of the more confusing things without precedent, Pao, I was wondering, how do we try to resolve this impasse? It would seem even the most, highest legal luminary, sometimes they also get confused, sometimes they change what they say, their opinion. So right now, everything's an opinion. Do we run to the SC to try to figure out what this exactly means for us to finally have a definitive answer to this question?
The difficulty with going to the Supreme Court at this point is that there might not be an actual case for it. And in the past, which we tried to make clear in the primer as well, the court really tries to avoid deciding difficult questions on impeachment and instead lets the Senate and the House iron it out before stepping in. So a lot of it will depend on the current Senate. The Senate is really in charge of the impeachment trial. The Constitution gives it a lot of prerogative in terms of the procedure it's supposed to undertake, and possibly in terms of understanding how the change in terms will affect its proceeding. But so far, as I understand it, the Senate isn't doing or plans to do anything, at least for now, until June.
So if we go by that, and if largely it will be up to the House leader, or at least the House and the Senate, or both houses of Congress to decide, then pretty much what Senate President Chis Escudero has been saying, that's kind of what we will be following, right? In a sense, he personally believes, he is of the opinion that it can cross over. So are we likely to see that happening?
That is a possibility. I know that we are used in our system to having the court speak with some authority as to how to interpret the Constitution, but there's a reason why it doesn't really interfere in impeachment. And that's because the character of the proceeding is that this is the last check that the political branches have on who gets to serve or continue to serve in government and possibly even hold future office in government. So it gives a lot of leeway to the Senate and the House. And unfortunately, unlike the courts, where you have very detailed, long explanations of why a court decides this way or the other way, the Senate really does a lot of it by precedent, by its own legislative practice, and really by politics. And that's really just part of the system and the haziness of impeachment, which makes it very interesting, but also quite difficult as a process.
Well, Prof, I also wanted to ask about the timeline, because under the Constitution, particularly paragraph 4, Article 11, Section 3, it uses the words shall, and forthwith to describe the trial by the Senate. Help us understand the use of the words shall and forthwith. Does that mean as soon as possible? I mean, we're not lawyers here, but what does that mean?
Everyone's been saying forthwith.
I'm sure Merriam-Webster Online has been getting a lot of hits on the word forthwith, which actually technically means immediately, without delay. But again, it's been open to legal interpretation.
Yeah, I do want to emphasize that when it gets to the Constitution, the interpretation of non-lawyers is more important than the interpretation of lawyers. It's the people's document. In theory, every person who voted for it in 1987 said yes to it and had a role in drafting it. And so the common understanding of forthwith does matter. When that said, whenever the Constitution uses the word forthwith, it has always meant without delay. So, or as a matter of course. And therefore, the typical understanding is that the Senate should start trial soon. I know that the reasoning that the Senate has provided is that it's on recess and a pre-declared recess at that until June. But the prevailing view or the emerging view, at least among scholars and academics and former justices, is that the function of the Senate when it comes to impeachment isn't really legislative. And so they're not so much as bound to the typical sessions that they have declared. The Senate can simply call itself into order and conduct the impeachment trial, as the Constitution seems to suggest in its text.
Yeah, but if the senators say, well, you know, as soon as possible is as soon as we reconvene, which is in June, then we'll take it up then, that also kind of holds, right? I mean, you can't also say, oh, no, that's a wrong way of looking at it or interpreting it.
Yes, so the Senate can also say that as soon as possible actually means that when it resumes sessions. And again, we go back to the discomfort around the haziness of impeachment, the uncertainty behind impeachment, and it's really just inherent in it as a political process. So it emphasizes something else in the Constitution, which we often don't emphasize in discussions, and that's the democratic character of this process, impeachment. So it's supposed to be done not by lawyers or by judges. It's supposed to be decided by people who actually are voted on because of politics. And so it's just inherent in that type of the process that unfortunately a lot of these questions, very interesting questions that have been coming up, are just not answerable without the Senate actually essentially taking the first step, or somebody filing a case in the Supreme Court and hoping that the court would actually take action contrary to what it has done in the past.
I have another question that's very confusing that came out. So I heard one of the panel prosecutors, Attorney Luistra, saying she is of the opinion, of course, she's also a lawyer. She said that if the vice president resigns before the Senate convicts, that the trial can continue. And there seems to be also dissenting opinions on that one. What would be yours?
My own view, and the primer does present both views, but my own academic view is it can continue despite the resignation. And the reason why that's the case is if you look at the text of the Article 11 itself, it does say that the penalty for impeachment shall not extend beyond removal from office and disqualification from holding further office. That second clause is often overlooked. And therefore, if we look at the process by how impeachments have gone in the past, the Senate has actually desisted from taking further action after a resignation. So this has been cited in various news reports. Ombudsman Mercedes Gutierrez, Chairman Andy Bautista, when they resigned, their impeachment trials did not proceed. And in the case of former President Estrada, when he resigned, the impeachment trial actually pre-terminated without a ruling. But other than the text itself, which suggests that the Senate should have some say on whether the official is not only removed but can still hold office after, you also have to account that this is really an accountability mechanism. And therefore, it might be frustrating, that mechanism in the Constitution, if an official can just resign if it doesn't look like he or she is going to win his or her impeachment trial. So the Senate should have that word eventually, I think.
In short, the Constitution is silent on whether or not the Vice President could be permanently banned from public office if she resigns before conviction.
Yes, so it's not so much that it's silent, it's ambiguous. The text itself could be read in either way. And there are some people, I think Justice Carpio has come up with an opinion that resignation would result in the termination of the trial, or the trial not even happening if she resigns before. But there is an emerging view, and I think a lot of it is driven by developments in the United States. So if you look at 4 years ago during the second Trump impeachment trial, the trial actually commenced after he left office. And the Senate had to deal with a procedural motion to stop the trial of President Trump because he had already left office. The Senate voted along bipartisan lines, 55 to 45. The U.S. Senate decided to continue with the trial and acquitted him nevertheless. But proceeding to trial kind of indicates that it sees its power as not frustrated by the termination of office of the impeachable officer. And just to add, right, the U.S. Senate practice is quite important because we do take this particular contentious provision from the U.S. Constitution. We follow very closely the wording of their equivalent provision. And so, as with many provisions that we take from the American Constitution, what their bodies do kind of informs us as to how that word or those words originally meant.
Okay, I did hear another constitutionalist actually in another interview say this exact thing. In the absence of precedent, look at the U.S. Constitution. And I wasn't quite sure, to be honest with you, how I felt about that. So you're saying that's actually something that is in fact done.
Yes, it's very accepted practice. And I understand the discomfort, my own scholarship, the scholarship of my colleagues in the University of the Philippines is a little uncomfortable with how much we actually take from the Americans in interpreting the Constitution. But it's one of those things that gives a little bit of stability to how we understand it. Basically, the thought is that if it was written into our Constitution in 1987 and the text was purposely copied from the American Constitution, then there may have been some intent on the part of the people who drafted the Philippine Constitution to take from American practice. So recent jurisprudence has really tried to pull back from that over-reliance. But when it comes to these very difficult provisions, very technical provisions, it seems like the American practice would still be somewhat of a good guide in terms of understanding these vague provisions of our Constitution.
The Senate holds all the power now.
Yeah.
In short.
Yeah, I mean, we're basically waiting for the Senate to make a definitive move. And I know that the Senate President Chis Escudero has made statements in public and in the media in the last few days, but there are 22 other senators who are, haven't been heard yet. I think they're unified in terms of being a caucus, but it would be interesting to also get the views of the other senators as to whether they feel that trial should proceed or not.
Fair point. We're going to have to leave that there for tonight. Thank you so much for your answers. It did enlighten us that much more. That was Paolo Tamase, Assistant Professor at the UP College of Law in Diliman and BGC. Thank you so much.
All right, it is actually a very, very sad day for the culinary world as it loses an icon. Award-winning chef and restaurateur Margarita Flores has passed away today at the age of 65, as confirmed by her son Amado Flores in a social media post. Known as Gaita to family and friends, Flores was named Asia's Best Female Chef in 2016. She began her journey in the industry with the modern Italian restaurant Cibo back in 1997, which later on branched out across the country. Her success led to the inception of multiple dining concepts and solidified her presence in the Philippine culinary scene. In a heartfelt tribute, Cibo honored its founder, her life, creativity, and the lasting legacy that she has left on the industry. Our thoughts and prayers are with Margarita Flores, her family, and the countless of lives that she has touched.
In 2016, she was named Asia's Best Chef. Can you imagine? Not just in the Philippines, but all over Asia. Asia's Best Female Chef by the world's 50 best restaurants. And also, she's a scion of the prominent Araneta clan, right?
She's a cousin of Mar Rojas.
Of Mar Rojas, which a lot of people may not know.
And I think one of the things that people may not really know about her, I mean, we're not friends or anything, but I just know that she is championing local food abroad.
Yes.
She will bring local delicacies abroad in food expos and, tirelessly promote our produce, which she also uses in some of her restaurants.
Well, I love Chibo and
Yeah.
all their restaurants.
Luso,
Luso.
Grace Park as
It just
well.
opened too in Podium, Luso.
Yeah. And I was telling Pao earlier tonight, what was even more shocking was that I saw that she had been posting just 24 hours before.
Yes. Some of her stories are actually still up on her
Right,
Instagram.
24 hours ago, she was posting about being in Hong Kong, and suddenly to have this kind of news is really devastating. Our condolences, deepest condolences go to her family and friends at this point.
On that sad note, that's it for the big story tonight.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.
Thank you for tuning in and have a good night.